I recently returned from a month-long trip to Japan and South Korea. I spent a week in Seoul, 3 days at the beginning of the trip, and 4 days at the end. This part 1 video will cover the first 3 days of my trip to Seoul. I will share my journey as a travel diary, so if you are planning a trip, you can learn from my mistakes and my successes. I'll apologize in advance for my poor Korean pronunciation. So here we go. Day 1. I flew from Osaka to Seoul in economy on Korean Air, arriving at Incheon Airport around 2:30 p.m., but customs took over an hour. My travel agent had pre-arranged a ride for me to my hotel, which took over 2 hours. I mentioned this in a previous video that it would have been smarter to take the express train from the airport to Seoul Station. It would have saved me time and money. I was booked to the Lodi City Hotel, which was very nice. I wandered out in the neighborhood that evening and ran into this lovely area, which I later discovered was called Cheongyecheon. It is a stream over 10 kilometers long that runs through Seoul and is a popular place for strolling. I stumbled across these beautifully painted tiles and researched them later. Evidently, the long installation is called Banchado and is an illustration of a visit by King Jeonjo to Suwon Castle. It is painted on over 5,000 ceramic tiles. That was the extent of my sightseeing for this day. I retired early because I knew I had a heavy schedule of touring the next day. Day 2. My travel agent had booked a private guide for the day, and he was amazing. He spoke very clear English and distilled his commentary to the essentials, which I truly appreciated. This was my 3rd week of traveling and absorbing historical details, so it was nice to have his condensed narration. Our first stop was the Haengung Palace in Suwon. It took about an hour to get there and longer to get back. However, it was really worth the trip. It is a massive complex which historically had several uses, including shelter for the kings during times of war, a hot tub spring for the king to rest, and a temporary palace where King Jeonjo stayed while he visited his father's tomb nearby. The history is intriguing, and the structures, walls, and scenery are magnificent. You could definitely spend an entire day here because the place has so much to see. Fortunately, my guide maneuvered us through the highlights in about an hour or 2. We drove back into the center of Seoul, battling traffic along the way, to the Namsan or Seoul Tower. The guide ran up the stairs to secure us a place in line, so we only had to wait about 20 minutes to take the cable car. Once on the cable car, it is a quick ride to the top. When we exited, there were some guards the guide told me were fake guards that were only there for show. All over Japan and South Korea, there were places to hang lovers' locks, but this place had the most I had seen. The locks were squeezed onto fences in many layers. We then walked to another building and waited in an additional line to take the elevator to the top. This line was shorter, and we entered into a curious visual display before going to the elevator. Inside the elevator, they had a video that displayed a wonderful view of the changing seasons of Seoul Tower. Here it is in fast motion. This segued to a trip through Seoul that ends at the tower. It reminded me of the soaring ride at Disney World. We were crammed into the elevator, so it was a great way to distract anyone who is claustrophobic. By the time it was over, we had reached the top, where the views were impressive. Fortunately, it was a clear day, so we could see way off into the distance. The guide pointed out the Blue House, which is akin to the White House in the U.S., and I was able to see the Han River and various other landmarks. The city looked vast from up here, and he explained that over 48% of the Korean population lives in the Seoul area. He also told me that I had to check out the toilets on this level. I obliged and discovered the best view from a toilet I had ever seen. We then took the elevator back down, which had a similar video show. Back out onto the intermediate plaza, there were some singers performing. The guide was worried about getting to our other destinations, so we didn't linger. I now wish I would have requested that we stay for at least 10 minutes to watch the locals perform. We then took a break from our touring to eat lunch. I suggested eating bibimbap, so the guide took me to a fabulous vegan cafe. The food was delicious. Here are the partial remains of my dish. It wasn't a restaurant I probably would have found on my own, so this was another advantage of having a guide. Our next stop was Insadong Street. The guide told me that it was an artsy shopping district, which didn't excite me because I'm not much of a shopper. However, it was truly unique. The building itself had very interesting architecture in that the floors gradually inclined upward. If you look close at this image, you can see the floors are not level. That had to be an architectural feat. There were many fun shops with unusual merchandise, such as this store that had artwork made from fuzz. Bukchon Hanok Village was next. It is a restored area with traditional Korean houses called Hanok. This has made it a popular tourism destination, which has evidently caused some friction with the residents who live there. A popular activity is to rent hanbok, the traditional Korean dress. There were plenty of tourists there, walking the charming narrow streets and enjoying the views from up high, looking towards Seoul Tower. From there, we walked to the Gyeongbokgung Palace. If you want to get a dose of how Koreans lived during the Joseon dynasty, this is the place to visit. It was built in 1395 and was the main royal palace, as well as the seat of government. The buildings are fabulous and ornately painted. There was a large open space in the middle where the subjects would gather. I was fascinated learning of the hierarchical system where people lined up by these stone markers according to their rank. Only the king was allowed to walk on these stairs. The entire grounds were covered with tourists, many of them wearing rented hanbok. At first I thought hanbok renting was just for tourists, but I saw plenty of locals wearing them too. My guide told me it was a popular thing to do. Behind the king's quarters was one of the most beautiful areas where the king housed his concubines. The queen was never allowed to leave her quarters, so it seemed the concubines had a better situation. The palace was another place you could spend an entire day exploring the grounds. Here are a few more images of the palace. This was an amazing day. By having the private guide, I was able to see 2 or 3 times as much in one day as I would have managed on my own. Day 3. For this day, I had pre-booked a motor coach tour to the DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone. I have already posted a detailed video on this excursion and have left a link in the description below. I'll say here that it was a very memorable experience and what I would recommend, especially if you're interested in the history of the Korean War and its aftermath. I'll continue my Seoul travel journey in part 2. Also, please see my other South Korean videos, including Gwangju, Busan, and Jeju Island, as well as my trip to the DMZ. I have left links to all the videos in the description. As always, if you have questions, feel free to ask in the comments section and/or join the new Facebook travel forum. I have left a link to it as well. And if you would like to follow my senior and solo travel journeys, please like and subscribe. Cheers!